The truth is finally about to be revealed to the world. Are you ready for the ultimate confrontation between past and present? Click subscribe now and don't miss a single beat of this heart-pounding and intense cinematic experience. My husband and his mother erased me from my own home. 3 years of silence, of being spoken around like furniture. Then he called to tell me he was remarrying. I went to the reception not knowing what to expect. When he saw me walk through that door, he couldn't speak. And I finally understood what I'd been worth to them all along. "Did you hear that?" My mother-in-law said from the kitchen, her voice carrying easily through the open floor plan I'd spent 2 years convincing my husband to renovate. "That clicking sound from the hallway?" My husband looked up from his tablet. "Probably just the heat coming on." I was standing 4 feet away from both of them, keys still in my hand from coming through the front door. I'd said hello when I walked in. I'd said it clearly enough. My mother-in-law had watched me set my purse on the counter. She'd looked directly at me. Then she turned to my husband and asked if he'd heard a clicking sound. That was day 19. "Before we go further, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe no one should be made invisible in their own home, please consider subscribing to the Masked Connections. It's free, and these stories reach people who need them." Now let me tell you what happened next. Day 19 of what I'd started calling the fog. Not the silent treatment that implies anger, implies feeling. This was something quieter and colder. My husband and his mother, who had moved in temporarily 8 months earlier after her hip surgery, had simply stopped acknowledging that I existed. Not in anger. Not with visible hostility. Just a gradual, steady erasure, like a photograph left in sunlight. His mother's name was Renata. She was 67, small-boned. With silver hair she kept pinned severely back and eyes that had the particular quality of always seeming to calculate something. She'd never liked me. I'd known that since the first Thanksgiving, when she'd complimented my cooking by saying my husband must have taught me. But I'd managed it. We'd managed it. Then her hip gave out, and my husband said 3 months, maybe 4. And I believed him because I believed him about most things then. 8 months later, she was still in our guest room. And 3 weeks ago, something shifted. I couldn't name the exact day it started, the way you can't name the exact day a season changes. One morning my husband made 2 cups of coffee and handed one to his mother and carried both to the table and sat down without making a third. I told myself he'd forgotten. The next morning, same thing. I told myself I'd just make my own. By the second week, I was making all my own meals, eating them standing at the counter while they sat at the table together discussing things: his work, her doctors, a cousin's new baby, and simply not speaking to me. Not addressing me. Not arguing with me or criticizing me. Just not including me in the category of people in the room. I tried. I inserted myself into conversations. I asked direct questions. Once, I put my hand on my husband's arm while he was talking, and he finished his sentence, stood up, and moved to the other side of the kitchen without acknowledging the touch. I'd started checking my reflection in the bathroom mirror each morning to confirm I was still there. My phone buzzed one afternoon while I was alone in our bedroom, which had become the only room in the house where I felt like I occupied space. "Still coming to Mom's birthday Saturday?" I stared at the message. Saturday was 4 days away. I hadn't left the house for anything other than work in 2 weeks. "Yes," I typed back. "I'll be there." Her reply came immediately. "Good. Haven't seen you in forever. You okay?" "Forever." I scrolled back through our texts. 6 weeks since we'd actually talked. I'd been spending all my energy trying to be seen inside my own house that I'd stopped existing anywhere else. "Fine," I typed. "Just busy." I set the phone down and looked at the bedroom door. On the other side of it, my husband and his mother were watching television. I could hear the faint sound of a laugh track. The normal sounds of an evening at home. A home I paid half the mortgage on, had decorated, had filled with plants I watered and furniture I'd chosen and a kitchen I'd reorganized 3 times until it worked perfectly. I walked to the closet to find something to wear to work the next day. And noticed something that stopped me completely. My husband's suitcase, the large one, the one we used for trips longer than a weekend, was packed and standing in the corner behind his hanging shirts. Half hidden. Not hidden enough. We had no trips planned. We hadn't taken a trip together in over a year. He'd said he was too busy with a project at work, and I'd believed that too. I stood there looking at the suitcase for a long moment before I noticed what was beside it. A document, folded in thirds, tucked between the suitcase and the wall. The kind of document you'd set down quickly if you were interrupted. The kind you wouldn't leave there unless you'd forgotten it in the process of packing things you didn't want your wife to see. I knew before I picked it up. The cover page read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." His signature was on the last page. Dated 11 days ago. 11 days ago, I'd made dinner for 3 and set it on the table and eaten alone in the kitchen because they'd taken their plates to the living room. 11 days ago, my husband had already decided. He'd already signed. He'd just been waiting for what, exactly? For me to find it myself. For me to break first? There was no note. No sticky label. No instruction. Just the papers, half hidden, like something he meant to deal with later. I folded them carefully and put them back exactly where I'd found them. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, in the room I'd shared with this man for 9 years, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not devastation. Clarity. The cold, precise clarity of finally understanding what you're actually looking at. The fog wasn't grief. It wasn't a phase. It was a campaign. I didn't cry, I didn't confront him. I went to bed on my side of the mattress and lay there with my eyes open, thinking. The next morning I drove to Rachel's apartment instead of going straight to work. She opened the door in her robe and looked at my face and stepped aside without a word. That was Rachel. She'd always been able to read me faster than I could read myself. I told her everything. Not just the last 3 weeks, all of it. The 8 months of Renata. The 2 cups of coffee. The conversations I was excluded from in my own kitchen. The suitcase. The papers. Rachel sat across from me at her small kitchen table and let me talk until I ran out of words. Then she said, "How long has he been making you feel like a guest in your own house?" I opened my mouth to say 3 weeks, but what came out was, a long time. Because Rachel was right. The active erasure had only been 3 weeks. But the groundwork, the way my preferences were always slightly inconvenient, the way his mother's comfort always seemed to matter more than my concerns, the way my name was never the first word in any sentence about our future that had been years. He'd been reducing me gradually, turning down the volume on my existence so slowly I hadn't noticed until someone had simply pressed mute. "Don't go back there yet," Rachel said. "I have to go back. It's my house. Then go back for your things. But don't sign anything. Don't react to anything. Don't let them know you found those papers." She leaned forward. "You need to understand what you're dealing with before you respond to any of it." I went back that evening. Collected my laptop, my important documents, the jewelry my grandmother had left me, and a box of photographs. I was careful and quiet. My husband was at the table with his mother. Neither of them looked up. I spent 3 nights at Rachel's before she made me call our mother, who made me come home. My parents' house was 40 minutes from the city, a wide ranch house with a garden my mother maintained with the same precision she applied to everything. She'd been a hospital administrator for 30 years. I arrived on a Thursday evening with a duffel bag and a box of things I'd grabbed without real planning. My father met me on the porch. He was 64, recently retired from running his own contracting business, a man who communicated primarily in practical actions. He looked at my face, took the box from my arms, and said, "I'll put coffee on." My mother sat with me at the kitchen table for 2 hours that first night and let me talk. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. Did I have access to our financial accounts? Had I contacted a lawyer? Did I have copies of the mortgage documents? I hadn't done any of those things. "First thing tomorrow," she said. All 3. My father appeared in the doorway with coffee and a plate of food I hadn't asked for. "Stay as long as you need," he said. "We have the room." That was the first night in weeks I slept through until morning. My mother was right to push me toward the finances. I logged into our joint account the next day expecting to find it normal. We weren't wealthy, but we'd been careful. 2 incomes, modest spending, a savings buffer I'd built up slowly over years of managing our budget. The account balance was $4,200. 14 months ago it had been over $38,000. I pulled up the transaction history with hands that went steadily colder as I scrolled. Regular transfers, beginning 16 months ago, to an account I didn't recognize. Small at first $800, $1,000, $100, $900. Then larger. Then consistent. Always to the same external account. Always in amounts just below the threshold that would have triggered an automatic alert from the bank. I did the math. He'd moved nearly $34,000 out of our joint savings over 16 months. While I'd been paying half the mortgage, buying groceries, covering utilities, managing what I thought was our shared financial life, he'd been quietly emptying the account we built together. I sat at my parents' kitchen table with the transaction history printed out in front of me and felt the full scope of what had been happening. This wasn't a marriage that had fallen apart. This was a marriage being methodically dismantled. The campaign to make me invisible in my own home, the packed suitcase. The pre-signed divorce papers, all of it timed to a financial plan that was already almost complete. He'd wanted me to leave. He'd made conditions intolerable specifically so I'd leave. And when I left, I was supposed to leave with nothing, and no one would understand why I'd abandoned my home and marriage without explanation. My father came into the kitchen while I was still sitting there. I showed him the transaction history without saying anything. He sat down, put on his reading glasses, and looked at it for a full minute. Then he said, "This is financial abuse. This is documented, it's patterned, and it's actionable." He'd spent 30 years running a business that occasionally required him to understand what legal trouble looked like. He recognized it clearly. "You need a lawyer today. Not this week. Today." My mother had already called her former colleague's daughter, who was a family law attorney with a reputation for taking complicated cases. Her name was Sandra Okafor. She had an opening at 2 in the afternoon. I sat across from Sandra in her office and spread out everything I had. The bank statements, the printed transaction history, the photograph I'd taken of the divorce petition before I'd put it back, the date on his signature. Sandra looked at all of it without expression, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "He made a significant error," she said when she'd finished. "What error?" "He moved money out of a joint account into an account in his name only. That's not just divorce strategy, that's dissipation of marital assets. Courts take that seriously." She looked up at me. "Combined with a documented pattern of behavior designed to force you to leave, that changes the picture considerably. Can I prove the behavior was intentional?" "The financial pattern proves intent." She tapped the transaction history. "This started 16 months ago. You've been married how long?" 9 years. 16 months of consistent financial transfers to a separate account, combined with a sudden shift in how you were treated at home. Combined with pre-signed divorce papers you were seemingly meant to find on his timeline. This isn't a husband who fell out of love. This is a husband who planned an exit. I exhaled slowly. "What do I do?" "You do nothing visible. You don't confront him. You don't move back. You don't respond to the papers. You let him believe he's already won." She folded her hands. "Comfortable people make mistakes. Right now he thinks you left in confusion and pain, exactly as planned. Let him keep thinking that." Sandra advised me to open my own account immediately and document everything I could access: emails, financial statements, mortgage documents, anything with both our names on it. She also advised me to contact my workplace's HR department, preemptively, to note that I was going through a divorce and to report any unusual contact from outside parties about my employment status. I thought that last part was cautious overcorrection until 2 days later, when my manager called me into her office and told me that a man identifying himself as my husband had called HR and suggested I might need to take a leave of absence for personal health reasons. I'd been a project coordinator at an engineering firm for 7 years. My manager had never had a single concern about my reliability. "I wanted to tell you directly," she said. "Whatever is going on personally, your performance record here is impeccable. But I wanted you to know the call was made." I sat across from her and thought about what Rachel had said. Understand what you're dealing with before you respond. I was beginning to understand it fully. "I'm going through a divorce," I said. "My husband is trying to build a narrative that I'm unstable. I'm sorry you were contacted. It won't affect my work." My manager nodded once. I'll note this conversation in your file as a protective measure. That evening, I called Sandra and told her about the HR contact. Classic, she said. He's building a case that you're unreliable, potentially unwell, unable to manage your own affairs. It's designed to give him leverage in the financial settlement and explain your absence from the home. Don't let him build that case unchallenged. We began building ours instead. My father spent a full weekend creating a financial timeline. Every transfer, every date, every amount, organized into a spreadsheet that told the story clearly. My mother drafted a written account of my character and conduct as she'd witnessed it over the past several years, the responsible, present, stable woman who'd managed a household, maintained a career, and shown no signs of the instability her husband was apparently now describing to anyone who'd listen. Rachel connected me with her neighbor, a woman named Donna who'd gone through a nearly identical situation 4 years earlier. A husband who'd systematically cleared joint finances before filing, painted her as erratic to friends and family, and tried to ensure she'd emerge from the marriage with nothing. Donna came over one evening and sat with me for 3 hours. "You're going to want to react," she said. "You're going to want to confront him, make him admit what he did, get him to say it out loud. Resist that completely." She had the steady voice of someone who'd already learned everything the hard way. The confrontation he's prepared for. The woman who quietly rebuilds her case, hires the right lawyer, and walks into a courtroom 6 months later fully documented. He is not prepared for that. I thought about that for a long time after she left. I didn't confront him. I didn't respond to calls from his number or the 2 voicemails he left that I listened to once and then deleted, both variations on "we should discuss this reasonably, and you're making this harder than it needs to be." I let him believe I'd simply dissolved, run home to my parents, fallen apart quietly somewhere. I let him get comfortable with that narrative. Sandra filed a response to his divorce petition 4 months after I'd left, documenting the financial dissipation, the asset transfer, the professional interference. His lawyer apparently went quiet for 2 weeks after receiving it. The settlement negotiation took another 3 months. Sandra was precise and unsentimental throughout. In the end, I received an equitable share of the assets, including the full value of what had been transferred out of our joint account, which his lawyer tried to characterize as legitimate financial management and which the bank's own records made obviously untrue. I didn't get everything I'd put into 9 years. You never do. But I left with enough to start somewhere real. I found an apartment in the city, 2 bedrooms, more space than I needed, filled with afternoon light. The furniture was second-hand but mine. The dishes were a mismatched set I'd chosen myself from a vintage shop because I liked the pattern. I got a plant for the windowsill and remembered, for the first time in years, that I liked plants. I went back to work full-time with a promotion I'd been offered 6 months earlier and hadn't taken because I'd been managing Renata's adjustment to our house, and trying to keep everything stable. I took it now. Rachel came over every Saturday morning. We walked in the park near my apartment and got coffee and talked about things that had nothing to do with divorce books she was reading, a new restaurant, our mother's increasingly ambitious garden. I'd forgotten what it felt like to spend an hour not thinking about how to manage someone else's perception of me. I joined a gym 3 blocks away. Started cooking actual meals instead of standing at someone else's counter eating toast. Began sleeping through the night with a consistency that felt miraculous after years of lying awake next to someone who'd already decided I didn't matter. I was 38 years old when I left. 39 when the divorce was finalized. 40 when I started recognizing, slowly, that the life I was building bore no resemblance to the one I'd been slowly shrinking myself to fit. I went through therapy for a year with a woman named Dr. Paulson who had the gift of asking questions that made you do all the work yourself. One session, about 8 months in, she asked me when I'd first started feeling invisible in my marriage. I'd intended to say 3 weeks before I left. What came out was a specific memory from year 2, a dinner party, my husband talking over me to his friends, Renata in the corner watching with an expression I now knew was satisfaction, and I'd thought, that's just how he tells stories. I'd explained away so much for so long that by the time they'd stopped pretending to acknowledge me entirely, I'd already done most of the work for them. You don't disappear all at once, Dr. Paulson said. You disappear in small decisions to make yourself less inconvenient. That was the sentence I wrote down and kept. 2 years after I'd walked out of my parents' house with the printed bank statements and the photograph of a divorce petition my husband had meant for me to find on his timeline, I got a phone call from a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in that entire time. My husband. I stood in my kitchen, in my apartment, where I'd made dinner for myself and had plans to meet Rachel later, and looked at his name on the screen. I answered because curiosity is not the same as vulnerability. "I wasn't sure this was still your number," he said. "It is. What do you need?" He sounded different. Not older exactly, but less certain. The quality in his voice that I'd once interpreted as confidence and later recognized as control had shifted into something softer and more uncertain. "I wanted to let you know," he said. "I'm getting remarried. The ceremony is next month. There's going to be a small reception." A pause. "I thought you should hear it from me." I was quiet for a moment, processing the information. Not the fact of it I'd expected he would eventually, but the reason for the call. Why tell me? What did he need from this conversation? "I appreciate you calling," I said, which was careful and gave him nothing. "Renata will be there," he added. She's had some health issues. It's been a difficult couple of years." I said nothing. "I wondered," he said, "if you might consider attending. To show for the sake of our friends, people who knew us both. To show that things ended civilly." I almost laughed. The request was so perfectly constructed, not "I'd like you there" or "it would mean something to me," but "for the sake of our friends." He wanted witnesses to his version of the story. He wanted me there, composed and gracious, validating the narrative that our marriage had ended reasonably, that I'd left on my own terms, that there was nothing complicated about the settlement that had taken his lawyer 2 months to stop arguing with. "I'll think about it," I said. I called Rachel before I'd put my keys down. "Why is he calling you?" was the first thing she said. "He's remarrying. He wants me at the reception." Silence. Then, "He wants you there so you'll look compliant. So his new wife's family sees a woman who walked away cleanly and bears no grudges. So the story he's been telling for 2 years gets confirmed by your presence." That's what I thought. "So you're not going?" I sat with that for a moment. The easy answer was no. The self-protective answer was no. But something else was asking a different question, not what does he need from this, but what do I actually want? "I want him to see me," I said. "Not to hurt him, not to cause a scene. I want him to see what he didn't break." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "Then you go," she said. "But you go on your terms. You go having done nothing wrong and needing nothing from him. You show up whole and you leave before he can reorganize." I called Sandra the next morning. She was unsurprised and characteristically practical. "Go if you want to go," she said. "But go armored. Speak less than you think you should. Observe everything. Leave before the evening gets complicated." She paused. "And understand that his composure may not hold when he sees you." I bought a dress I would have been afraid to buy 2 years ago. Not extravagant clean lines, a deep burgundy that I'd always thought suited me and never worn because my husband had once said he found it too bold. I had my hair done by the woman at the salon I'd been going to since I'd moved into my apartment, who knew my name and always had the same chair ready. The morning of the reception, I sat in my car in the parking garage for 10 minutes before I drove to the venue. Not because I was afraid. Because I wanted to arrive having already decided who I was walking in as. The venue was a private event space downtown, tasteful, expensive. The kind of place designed to feel intimate while accommodating 100 people. I arrived slightly late, by design, after most guests were already seated. I found a spot near the back with a clear line of sight to the room. The ceremony portion had finished. This was the reception, the part designed for display. I watched people I recognized from years of dinner parties and work events, people who'd known me as his wife. People who'd presumably heard some version of what had happened. Then I saw him. My husband was at the front of the room with his new wife, who was younger than me, with the bright and slightly nervous energy of someone who'd never been through this before. He was talking to someone from his office, laughing at something, the picture of the successful man at his own celebration. Then someone near me shifted, and he glanced toward the back of the room, and his eyes found mine. The change was immediate and complete. The laughter stopped mid-sentence. His face went very still. the specific stillness of someone running calculations fast. His new wife said something to him and he didn't respond. The man from his office followed his gaze toward the back of the room, confused. I didn't move. I didn't look away. I stood in the back of the room in a burgundy dress I'd bought for myself, in a life I'd built without him, and I held his gaze until he was the one who looked away. Renata was at a table near the front. I saw the moment she registered me a small flinch, quickly controlled, followed by something in her expression that I could only read as the reckoning of a woman who'd believed she'd won completely. I stayed for 20 minutes. I spoke to two people who approached me, a former neighbor who embraced me warmly and asked how I was doing, and a colleague of my husband's wife who didn't know the history and made pleasant small talk about the venue. I was present. I gave nothing away. When I moved toward the exit, I felt him before I heard him. Footsteps behind me, quick, slightly uneven. You came, he said. I turned slowly. He was standing 8 feet away. His reception composure entirely gone. Something urgent and uncertain in his face that I'd never seen before, not in 9 years of marriage. Not once. You invited me, I said. He looked at me the way people look at things they expected to have control over and don't. I didn't think you'd actually. He stopped. Started again. You should get back to your guests, I said. Catherine. His voice dropped. I know things weren't. He stopped again. He had words prepared, I could see that, and they weren't working. I want you to know I didn't mean for it to end the way it did. I looked at him for a moment. Not with anger. Not with performance. Just with the clear-eyed recognition of someone who had looked at a situation honestly and understood it completely. You planned it for 16 months, I said. The money, the HR call, the papers you left for me to find. It ended exactly the way you meant it to. I picked up my keys from my purse. What you didn't plan was what I did next. He flinched. I don't need an apology, I said. I don't need an explanation. I needed about 12 months to figure out that the life I'm building now is better than the one you made me invisible in. I met his eyes. I'm glad you called. It was genuinely good to know I could walk in here and feel nothing but free. I walked out into the evening air and drove home with the windows down and the radio on. The city lights reflecting on wet streets from an earlier rain. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, plant on the sill, dishes drying on the rack, the novel I was halfway through on the coffee table. I changed into comfortable clothes, opened a bottle of wine Rachel had given me for my birthday, and sat by the window. My phone buzzed. Rachel. How'd it go? I thought about how to answer for a moment. Then I wrote. Exactly as it should have. She replied immediately. That's everything. I sat there in my quiet apartment, in my city, in my life, and thought about what I'd understood in that parking lot when I'd watched my husband's composure break entirely at the sight of a woman he'd expected to disappear. He'd built a campaign on the assumption that making me invisible would make me gone. That the woman he'd reduced would stay reduced. He'd miscalculated the only thing that mattered. I hadn't left because I'd broken. I'd left because I'd finally seen clearly. And everything I'd done since the lawyer, the documentation, the apartment, the promotion, the Saturday walks with Rachel, the burgundy dress had been the work of a woman who'd decided she was worth seeing. The best response to being erased isn't to fight to be redrawn by the same hands that erased you. It's to pick up the pen yourself. I turned off the light and went to bed in the quiet of my own choosing, and slept until morning without once wondering whether someone on the other side of the house was pretending I didn't exist. I was done being invisible. I had been, for quite some time. If this story stayed with you, hit that like button right now. My favorite moment was when she stood in the back of that room in a burgundy dress and held his gaze until he looked away. That's not revenge. That's reclamation. What moment hit you the hardest? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want more stories about people who refuse to stay erased, subscribe and hit the notification bell. The next one is already waiting for you.